our planet is facing unprecedented environmental threats that will have consequences for us and future generations. These threats are global, transcending political borders. The science is clear. Together, we have a responsibility to follow the facts. Together, we have a responsibility to do our fair share to find global solutions to our planetary crisis. At the United Nations Environment Programme, our vision is to help people and countries to thrive while living in harmony with nature. We believe it is possible. Our mission is to inform, enable, and inspire people and countries to act, and act decisively to reverse the effects of climate change, to strengthen biodiversity, and to limit the impact of pollution on our wild spaces, our oceans, and our cities. UNEP identifies and addresses the root causes of environmental challenges. In short, we need to move towards sustainable consumption and production. That is why we work with countries to integrate environmental sustainability into economic growth. We support each and every country. Now we need your help. All 193 countries in the UN agreed to share the responsibility to support UNEP's Environment Fund. Fair share ensures that each country contributes based on their economic capacity. The size of each contribution is calculated using a tool that countries themselves agreed to. It is not about an equal share, but a fair share. These flexible funds provide UNEP with the means to provide unbiased science, catalyze policy reforms, and enable action. By contributing their fair share to UNEP, each country is honoring its commitment to global environmental action. By contributing their fair share, each country is in solidarity with its fellow nations and in solidarity with nature. We call on all countries to do their part. Help fund UNEP. Pay your fair share. For people, planet, and prosperity.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. I call to order the online meeting of the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Pursuant to Decision 4.2 and subsequent decisions of the Bureau of the Assembly, the present session of the Assembly is being held virtually from February 22nd to 23rd, 2021. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Given the unprecedented circumstances which we are meeting today, let us listen to a short welcome message delivered by Cabinet Secretary of Environment and Forestry, His Excellency Mr. Keriako Tobiko, on behalf of UNEP's host government of Kenya.
Dear colleagues, friends, on behalf of the Republic of Kenya, which is the environmental capital of the world, in which houses UNEP and UNON, let me say how pleased I am to invite you all to this online session of UNEA-5. This session is happening against the backdrop of the global pandemic, COVID-19, and the serious consequences on economies, communities, and livelihoods. That is precisely the reason why this segment is being held online. I am addressing you presently from one of our green spaces, urban forest, located in the center of the Nairobi city, our capital city. These green spaces have helped our people, our communities, providing them with a conducive environment to relate, to relax with their families during the lockdowns as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This session is going to be online, and we'll be discussing largely administrative and budgetary issues. There will also be an online session of Ministers for Environment to discuss topical issues. The substantive agenda would hopefully, God willing, be held next year, February, in person. I hope and pray that that happens. Let me once again invite you and say how pleased we are to have you participate with us, and very much look forward to fruitful deliberations. Karibuni sana.
We are meeting in unprecedented times. Together with the world, we have adapted to a new way of doing things. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has required us to embrace this technological medium to convene this session of the Assembly. We should be proud that we are able to meet today. 151 member states are registered and connected online. It proves how seriously and important we consider the environment to be. In 2022, it will be 50 years since the creation of the United Nations Environment Programme. This meeting will also represent the start of celebrating UNEP at 50, an opportunity to look back with pride at what has been achieved as inspiration to the global environmental agenda for the future. Because these are indeed sobering times, getting back on our feet after that pandemic is a real challenge that we all face. Getting back on track to fulfill the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially for the poorest and most vulnerable, is imperative. We will not succeed unless we truly transform our relationship with our planet. So I believe that we must increase our impact at a higher scale than we are currently operating. Can we identify actions which can help us address climate change and protect biodiversity or reduce pollution at the same time? Identifying such co-benefits would allow us to increase the impact of our actions. We are in this together, and we must respond together, each doing our part. The United Nations is built on hope and solidarity, and this is no less true for UNEA. I trust that this online Environment Assembly will also motivate and inspire real action. Now, let us start. But first, I wish to acknowledge the months of hard work and cooperation by my colleagues in the Bureau of the Assembly and the Committee of Permanent Representatives in preparing for this session. It is truly appreciated. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for your unwavering and strong support under the leadership of Executive Director Ms. Inger Andersen. All your efforts exemplify the spirit of the United Nations. I now have the pleasure to invite Ms. Inger Andersen Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, to deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Minister Rotevatn, and indeed to all excellencies, honorable ministers, observers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning, good afternoon. We are, as we just heard, meeting at a time of great upheaval. Over 1 year on, we are still feeling the full impacts of the pandemic. And as a result, we are unable to greet each other in person at this, the 5th gathering of UNEA. COVID-19 pandemic is inextricably linked to the 3 planetary crises of our own making: the climate crisis, the nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. I do not need to go into detail about these crises. You know all about them. And they were detailed in UNEP's Making Peace with Nature report, launched last week by the Secretary General, a report that provides a comprehensive breakdown of the immediate peril facing the planet, a report which also provides the scientific underpinning for the new UNEP medium-term strategy. Indeed, this report has received unprecedented coverage. More than 1,000 news stories in 74 countries have been published thus far, with stories appearing in 22 languages, including, of course, all the 6 UN languages. Excellencies, colleagues, as tomorrow's UNEA at 50 kickoff shows, we have spent half a century working to achieve and slow these crises. And we have achieved much. We now fully understand the causes of and solutions to the crisis. We have acted through many multilateral agreements, from healing the ozone layer, to slowing the growth of emissions, to increasing actions on biodiversity. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are now issues that voters, markets, and businesses practice. But we have to acknowledge that the situation is worsening, that doing more of the same, therefore, and doing it at the same speed as that we have employed up until now, will not bring about the pace of change that is needed. We have to acknowledge that the time for our movement is now to change drastically. We have to acknowledge that we need an all of society effort with the planet, and therefore to create environmental conditions so that all of humanity can thrive now and for generations to come. So UNEA-5 must drive this radical change to an era of action. By agreeing to hold UNEA virtually, you have already demonstrated its relevance. This assembly is the world's top environmental body. It sits at the core of the Rio+20 architecture, uniting all of environmental agendas. It is about deciding where we go and how fast we go there. Most importantly, it is about lives. Most of us at this meeting have seen our jobs and health hold up during the pandemic, but others have not been so lucky. We have a duty of care to everyone who's lost their jobs, their health, their family members, their lands, their future. If we do not get on top of the 3 planetary crises, and quickly, the planet will warm, nature will wither, many more will suffer. Over the last year, you have supported UNEP by increasing our income to the core fund. I thank you deeply for this vote of confidence. And I now ask you in this first UNEA session to approve the medium-term strategy, the program of work and budget, so we can work harder, faster, and stronger. And then take the vision of UNEA out into the world in this critical year. I know everyone has tried hard, worked hard, done your jobs, fought for the environment. I now ask you to do more, because it's time to move from banging the drum to banging doors, because the environmental crisis that humanity is facing cannot be addressed in the manners of modes of yesterday, because the challenge is of existential proportion, because time is no longer on our side and action must be now, because failure is simply not an option. We must make businesses, investors, and your very own colleagues in other ministries commit to turning 2021 into the year in which we began making peace with nature. That means backing a green recovery from the pandemic. That means joining the Net Zero Club and submitting stronger nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. That means agreeing an ambitious biodiversity framework backed by the means of implementation. That means mobilizing whole of government, economy, and society. That means deploying rapid efforts to renew nature through the decade of ecosystem restoration. That means adopting a new chemicals management framework and redoubling progress on plastic pollution. And that means stepping up action to ensure planetary, human, and animal health through One Health Alliance. We need these meaningful commitments and the accompanying action on the ground together with global solidarity so that we can build on them at the resumed session UNEA-5 in 2022. So colleagues, the world is watching, not least the next generation. The Youth Assembly took place last week, and they call for your leadership, your commitment, your action, and your courage. Yes, this is a time of great upheaval, but it is in upheaval that humanity excels. It is when humanity is faced with the gravest challenge that we must lift our heads from the daily grind and find better ways of being, so that we can make peace with nature, so that we can conquer poverty, so that we can deliver justice. I call on you, who make up the United Nations Environment Assembly, to rise to this existential challenge. Let it be said that when the world convened at the highest environmental authority, that the world's environment ministers rose to that challenge, that they were able to see past divisions and rather look to the horizon with a steely determination to mend an ailing planet and be that driving force that leads us to a just, peaceful, and sustainable future. Thank you.
Ms. Andersen, on behalf of the Bureau and myself personally, thank you for your leadership and thank you for your support. I now have the particular pleasure to invite representatives of the Children and Youth Major Group to address the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly. Ms. Hera Ali and Mr. Gyubin Hwang, representatives of the Children and Youth Major Group, you have the floor.
Dear Hera, kindly take the floor.
Distinguished delegates, excellencies, thank you for the floor. My name is Hera, and together with my colleague Gyubin, we will be speaking on behalf of the Children and Youth constituency. I serve as the Environment and Health Thematic Facilitator on Health and COVID-19 Recovery for the Children and Youth Major Group, as well as the Chairperson of Public Health at the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation, which represents pharmacy students and recent graduates. We congratulate the Presidency, the Secretariat, and the Member States for convening this virtual session of UNEA-5. This sets an example across the UN system that intergovernmental work can happen in a virtual format while allowing greater accessibility and representation from around the world. Considering the unprecedented times, we emphasize the need to be prepared for such formats in the future. We consider it crucial that the UNEA Bureau and the UNEP Secretariat prepare a sound Plan B for the virtual UNEA 5.2. As we speak here, we remind you that a pandemic is ravaging through our society. Millions of children suffer from hunger and poverty. Environmental defenders are risking their lives and faith in multilateralism is declining. We bring to you a message of urgency. On Saturday, we concluded the 5-day-long virtual Youth Environment Assembly organised by the Youth Constituency. The Assembly engaged young people from over 170 countries, several UN agencies, member states and other institutions on the theme Act for Nature, Act with Youth, emphasizing the importance of co-leadership of young people. Youth should lead and not just be acted upon by existing processes. We are not on track to achieve the environmental dimension of the 2030 agenda or the targets of various MEAs, and the urgency cannot be higher. In 2004, at the end of the SARS pandemic, scientists warned the global community of the increasing amount of pandemics to be expected. We urge member states and the UNEP Secretariat to act according to this, to work on the mitigation and to ensure intergovernmental processes become more resilient and able to create real progress independent of circumstances. Meaningful youth engagement has to be right-based. It has to be equitable. We have to provide designated spaces for young people to self-organize and engage in the UN. During the course of the Youth Assembly, we launched the Chemicals Waste Youth Platforms in cooperation with the SAICIM, BRS, and the Minamata Conventions. We initiated the work toward the Science, Policy and Business Forum Youth Working Group, and we are working on the inception of the Official Youth Task Force on the Restoration Decade. These are a few examples, and while these are incremental steps, we need to do a lot more to ensure children and youth are at the table to walk the talk. Acting with youth and allowing youth engagement, however, does not only mean to open processes to young people, but to also cater to their needs of additional capacity and new open forms of working and cooperation. Children and youth organize in different manners, right from the community-based organizations, grassroots movements, to regional and international networks. I now pass the floor to my colleague, Gyubin.
Kindly raise your hand, Gyubin, please.
Thank you very much, Hera. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, my name is Gyubin Hwang from the Republic of Korea, and I'm honored to speak here on behalf of the Children and Youth Major Group. I'll congratulate the Secretary General and the Executive Director for the launch of the synthesis report, Making Peace with Nature. This report has highlighted the interconnectedness of the three environmental emergencies and that the solution is and must be a collective one. In the same spirit, we say, these solutions must be an intergenerational one. I would like to highlight two key messages from this report within the context of science policy and environmental governance, the two foundational sub-programs as laid out in the medium-term strategy. First, it is that economic and financial systems that we rely on to shape policy are no longer fit for purpose. They have failed to account for the intangible value of nature, and conventional analyses of economic development do not take into account the loss to future generations that will be caused by climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Children and youth call on member states to include the value of nature in economic analyses and incorporate it as a key policy lever when you make decisions that concern us. At the same time, we ask UNEP to incorporate these analyses in their communications. Economic stakeholders often listen to the dismal science more than they do climate physics. Minister Rotevatn, this is an opportunity for UNEP to change the narrative. I urge you not to let it go. The second message is that advanced science policy processes are essential to meeting our climate targets. In the MTS, UNEP has committed itself to serving as a knowledge broker that builds consensus around existing and emerging environmental issues. The launch of the Global Environmental Outlook 6 for Youth report last week at the Youth Environmental Assembly is an encouraging step towards an inclusive science policy interface. During your discussions today and tomorrow, we are calling on you, member states, to establish a trust fund on youth engagement to be administered together with the youth constituency, and in so doing, make means of implementation a reality. Nothing about us without us. This assembly is being held under exceptional circumstances, but the future of our planet cannot wait. The Children and Youth Major Group calls on member states to fulfill your commitment to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hwang, and thank you, Ms. Ali. These remarks were certainly heard. You have reminded us of the importance of our task, and at least speaking for myself, I hear you. Next, I am honored to introduce a video address from Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to address the 5th UN Environment Assembly, the preeminent forum for multilateral action on environmental issues. I extend my sincere appreciation to the government of Kenya for hosting the assembly, even if virtually, and for serving as the hub of UN environment. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may be candid, the tragic irony is that this scaled-down assembly is directly linked to humanity's continued encroachment on the natural world. While we will hopefully emerge from the pandemic sooner than later, there is no certainty that we will not face further such crises in the years to come. The next zoonotic disease, with the ability to spread across borders, may be just around the corner, and the warnings are all around us. At our current level of use and exploitation, we would require 1.6 Earths to maintain current living standards. Extinction rates are around 100 to 1,000 times higher than the baseline rate and are increasing. Average temperature has risen 1.18 degrees Celsius, with 2016 and 2020 tied as the warmest years on record. And land degradation has reached 24% per year. 12 million hectares of land, an area the size of Benin, are lost. We have a fundamental and existential choice to make. Continue down our current path, which involves pressing demands on a planet whose capacity cannot meet our needs as is, or we adjust our behaviors, however inconvenient that may be, to find some sort of harmony and balance with the world around us. And this is very much the time to act. With recovery from COVID-19, unlocking unparalleled resources, and with public and political will at an all-time high, we have the opportunity to pursue true transformational change. Using the Sustainable Development Goals as our compass, we can recover better from COVID-19. We can turn this tragedy into an opportunity to pursue a world that is more resilient, more equitable, and more sustainable. Excellencies, this year we will have 3 COP-level events on the environment covering biodiversity, land degradation and drought, and climate. I'm pleased to say that the General Assembly will support each of these engagements and a series of high-level meetings, including one on water in March and another on desertification, land degradation and drought in May, will aim to build political support. The latter event will also make clear the need to build momentum from the end of the decade to fight desertification to the beginning of the decade of ecosystem restoration. I trust you will join me in emphasizing the urgency of action and the importance of these events in building global consensus. I thank you for your time and wish you success in your discussions.
Before we conclude this segment of our agenda, I have the honor to introduce a special message from the UN Secretary General, Mr. António Guterres, to the Environment Assembly.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm pleased to greet the United Nations Environment Assembly. We meet at a time of crisis and fragility. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to cause turmoil worldwide. Millions of people have been pushed into poverty, with women bearing the heaviest burden. Inequalities among people and countries are growing, and we face a triple environmental emergency: climate disruption, appalling biodiversity decline, and a pollution epidemic that is cutting short some 9 million lives a year. As UNEP's own Making Peace with Nature report makes clear, we need a healthy planet for sustainable development. Indeed, By taking profits of nature-based solutions, we can vastly improve human well-being and prosperity. So I commend the delegates gathered today for your commitment to ending our environmental ills. This is a critical year to reset our relationship with nature. Following this important Environment Assembly, UN member states will gather to address biodiversity loss, chemical pollution, ocean health, desertification, and of course, climate disruption. All these events are opportunities to increase ambition and action. You have a busy year ahead. You have a great responsibility to articulate the environmental dimension of sustainable development. Governments and people need to understand in their very DNA that all environmental, social, and economic challenges are interlinked, and they must be tackled together. For example, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, we need to prevent ecosystem collapse that will undermine food and water security around the world. But as I said, we are in a state of crisis. The oceans are filling with plastic and becoming more acidic. The Earth is heading for catastrophic temperature rise of more than 3 degrees Celsius, and biodiversity is declining at a perilous rate. We have no choice but to transform how our economies and societies value nature. We must put the health of the planet at the center of our plans and policies. The economics are clear. More than half of global gross domestic product depends on nature. Yet, our natural capital has declined 40% in just over 2 decades. This is why the World Economic Forum lists biodiversity loss and ecosystems collapse as one of the top 5 threats humanity will face in the coming 10 years. The urgency for action has never been clearer. This meeting needs to generate a global will for action, a transformation of our relationship with nature. By the climate COP in Glasgow, at the latest, we need all countries to come forward with more ambitious nationally determined contribution with 2030 targets that are consistent with carbon neutrality by 2050. By the Biodiversity COP in Kunming, nations must show how they will reverse species and ecosystem loss with concrete targets and means of implementation. We must also ensure a strong post-2020 framework for the sound management of chemicals and waste. That means preventing harmful chemicals and waste from entering the environment and adopting effective, safe alternatives that safeguard the health of people and the environment. And we must work to prevent the decline of our oceans. That includes ending unsustainable fishing practices, expanding marine protected areas, and drastically reducing maritime pollution, including plastic. Our action to protect the ozone layer has shown that when all stakeholders are aligned, action can succeed. It should be an inspiration and guide for all our efforts to protect the global environment. But we all know that words are not enough. Commitments must be underpinned by clear and credible plans. So I cannot overstate the importance of your deliberations. I know that these meetings virtually are not easy to have. In preparation for COP26 in Glasgow and other intergovernmental processes, I have directed UN officials around the world to have offices and venues available so all countries can participate in virtual negotiations. We will support you in every way possible. To a large degree, the viability of humanity on this planet depends on your efforts. With leadership, determination, and commitment to future generations, I'm convinced we can provide a healthy planet for all humanity to not just survive, but to thrive. I wish you a productive meeting, and I thank you.
Thank you all for your attention, and to Mr. Guterres for his message and support of our mandate and goals as the UN Environment Assembly and of the UN Environment Programme. We are now truly reminded how critical our responsibility is. This online meeting must mark a commitment on our side to roll up our sleeves again. We must take the action needed to build a strong and resilient post-pandemic world which delivers a sustainable future for all. I now invite you to turn your attention to agenda item number 2, which is adoption of the agenda and organization of work. As contained in document UNEP-EA5-1-Rev1, entitled Provisional Agenda for the 5th session of the Assembly. May I invite the Assembly to adopt its provisional agenda? I see no objections. I declare the agenda adopted. I now wish to invite you to turn your attention to the organization of work as presented in the annotated agenda UNEP-EA5-1-Rev1-Add1. Organization of work. Taking into account the exceptional circumstances associated with the coronavirus pandemic, this online session of the Environment Assembly will undertake an initial consideration of agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and 15 of the agenda, and thereafter, during the resumed in-person meeting expected to be held in February 2022, the Assembly shall conclude the consideration of the remaining items on the agenda. We will now hear statements from the regional and political groups. Given the time constraint, I urge the representatives speaking on behalf of these groups to please limit their statements to 5 minutes. I wish to call upon His Excellency Mr. Beyene Russom, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Eritrea and Dean of the African Diplomatic Corps in Nairobi, who will deliver remarks and introduce the Honorable Ms. Barbara Creecy, Rapporteur of the UNEA Bureau, Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries of the Republic of South Africa, and President of the African Ministerial Conference on Environment. Ambassador Russom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the President of the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly, Your Excellencies, dear Executive Director of UNEP, Madam Inger Andersen, the Chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, Ambassador Coimbra, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. We, the African ambassadors and high commissioners here in Nairobi, Kenya, commonly known as the African Group, are very much honored and privileged to have this morning our President of the African Ministerial Conference of the Environment, AMSEN, Her Excellency Barbara Creecy, who is also the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment of South Africa, to deliver a statement on behalf of the Africa Group. Therefore, it is a privilege for me to invite Her Excellency Mrs. Barbara Creecy to give her statement. Madam Minister, thank you.
Distinguished Minister Creecy, kindly unmute your microphone, please. Please proceed. Minister Creecy, if you cannot unmute your microphone, we will give you the floor immediately. So we will cancel this, and please raise your hand to ensure that your connection comes swiftly. Kindly proceed, distinguished minister.
Are you able to hear me now?
Very well.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you very much. The President of the Fifth United Nations Environment Assembly, Your Excellencies, the Executive Director of UNEP, the Chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am indeed honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. First, allow me to thank and commend you, Your Excellency, Mr. Sveinung Rotevatn, Minister for Climate and Environment of Norway and President of this fifth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, for your good leadership under the very unusual and challenging circumstances due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Allow me also to take this opportunity to pass my condolences to all of you who, as a result of this pandemic, have lost family, friends, and colleagues. Let me thank the members of the Bureau of the Committee of Permanent Representatives under the leadership of His Excellency Ambassador Fernando Coimbra for the outstanding work in preparing for this first session of UNEA-5. Mr. President, the African Ministers of Environment met virtually on the 4th of December 2020 for the 8th special session of the African Ministers' Conference on the Environment, AMSEN, under the theme Enhancing Environmental Action for Effective Post-COVID-19 Recovery in Africa. During this session, the ministers deliberated on Africa's engagement in and commitment to their active participation for the first part of UNEA-5. The ministers reaffirmed their commitment to continue efforts to conserve, protect, and enhance the resilience of Africa's environment and natural resources as part of their determined efforts in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. As part of the recovery efforts on the continent, AMSEN has adopted the African Green Stimulus Program. This program seeks to address in a sustainable manner the devastating socio-economic and environmental impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to more importantly harness the opportunities which this approach brings for the continent. It further aims to mobilize additional financial and technical resources to upscale and enhance the implementation of the portfolio of programs within the 12 key priority areas, while identifying areas requiring new interventions to support Africa's green recovery. The program intends to provide an overarching framework which consolidates and coordinates green economy and climate change initiatives on the continent, which have been grouped into 12 areas under one comprehensive umbrella. Mr. President, our group welcomes the UNEP midterm strategy for the period 2022 to 2025, the program of work and budget for the same period, and the related appropriations for the Environment Fund. This has already been articulated by the group's engagement during the recently concluded open-ended meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives. The group wishes to emphasize the need for a more coordinated and coherent regional delivery of the program of work. This is also in the context of previous requests by the group on strengthening UNEP's regional presence in Africa. We believe that such strengthening will continue to promote an efficient and effective delivery of UNEP's mandate in the region. Regarding the draft procedural decision on the adjournment and resumption of UNEA-5, The group wishes to reiterate its position that this virtual UNEA session only addressed procedural issues, and that any substantive matters that need to be addressed by UNEA are done so during the resumed session in 2022. The African group acknowledges the importance of commemorating the 50th anniversary of the establishment of UNEP in Nairobi. The group is ready to work collectively with the president of UNEA-5 and the incoming president of UNEA-6 in the preparations towards a successful commemoration. The group reiterates that such a successful commemoration of the 50th anniversary of UNEP will help reinforce the centrality of UNEP in the global environmental agenda and as the leading global environmental authority. The Africa Group would like to encourage others to refrain from the need to continue to push for online negotiations on substantive matters in global processes due to the ongoing challenges the world is facing. For our continent, the virtual format of negotiations has not proven to be one where there is a level playing field, with some delegations, most notably from Africa, being left behind. The open-ended meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, which has just concluded, demonstrated the technical and connectivity difficulties delegates faced in conducting meetings in the virtual format. The line-by-line consideration of the draft decisions in the contact group proved that even with a significantly scaled-back set of procedural decisions, it was very difficult to forge ahead. Finally, Mr. President, the Africa Group remain ready to engage constructively in the deliberations of this online UNEA-5 and look forward to a possible consensual meeting or statement. Look forward to a possible consensual message or statement integrating the key messages highlighted by the ministers as an outcome of this session. I wish once again to express our unequivocal support towards cooperating with all member states, regional groups, and your team in ensuring a successful UNEA and beyond. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I will now invite His Excellency Mr. Saleh bin Sulaiman Al-Harthi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Sultanate of Oman, who will deliver a statement on behalf of the Asia-Pacific states.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me first to remove this for a while and deliver my statement. معالي السيد رئيس جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة، معالي المديرة التنفيذية لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة، معالي الوزراء أصحاب السعادة السفراء والممثلين الدائمين السيدات والسادة. تحية لكم من مجموعة آسيا والمحيط الهادي، ويشرفني أن أقدم الكلمة.
Good morning all. On behalf of our group, we are making this declaration
في مجموعة آسيا والمحيط الهادي على ضرورة اتخاذ إجراءات بشأن حلول مبتكرة متكاملة، السياسات، التمويل، التكنولوجيا، نماذج الأعمال والتغيرات.
Take decisions that were necessary
وصديقة للبيئة من خلال
the best for the environment. These are actions taken to correct the
أن جائحة كوفيد-19 تستدعي وضع وتطبيق سياسات وخطط استراتيجية لإعادة.
This current pandemic gives us an opportunity to build back better for a sustainable and socio-economic development.
إيمان مع موضوع
And since we have chosen the theme of this meeting for sustainable development, we have seen how critical it is to fix the problems post-pandemic whilst working on international cooperation for building back better. We have undertaken a number of initiatives, such as those in to reach zero plastic litter by 2050, towards a green economy, and we also worked upon in our group to reduce carbon emissions, as was seen in New Zealand, in Marshall Islands, and other countries. Saudi Arabia presidency of the G20, a number of initiatives and strategies were launched to reduce emissions and to work in coastal areas. Sandstorms and desertification are extremely worrying for us. The United Nations decision from the General Assembly, which acknowledges these danger, is important, and we must take the necessary actions in order to overcome the challenges of combating desertification and sand and dust storms. All of these forums give us an opportunity to work together and united in our region. We need a framework for work which is balanced in order to address all of the issues. The 15th session of biodiversity, which will take place this year, will be an opportunity for these initiatives and work. The Republic of Korea will host the ministers of environment from our region, and we will have the first environment forum for the region for transformative processes which are critical to build and to launch the initiatives for the Environment Assembly for this year and next year in Nairobi. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. Next is His Excellency Mr. Martin Gómez Bustillo, who is the ambassador and permanent representative of Argentina, who will deliver a statement on behalf of Latin American and Caribbean states. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning. I hope you hear me.
Thank you very much, Chairman, President. On behalf of the Regional Group of Latin America and the Caribbean, Nairobi chapter, we would like to extend our greetings to you, to the
Embajador Coimbra y la directora ejecutiva
Executive Director Inger Andersen, as well as all those present, recognizing the work undertaken to get to where we are today. COVID-19 is an enormous challenge for the whole multilateral system of the United Nations. UNEP and its governing bodies have risen to the circumstances, working and meeting their objectives despite the difficulties we face. We are all aware of the limitations of the virtual format for the participation of developing countries on an equal footing. Nevertheless, today we are holding this assembly and strengthening our pledge to multilateralism and sustainable development, and once again confirming the role of UNEP as the main global environmental authority, whilst acknowledging that the virtual format reveals new imbalances that we must consider, especially for developing countries. Against this backdrop, one must respect objectives, our targets, our principles, which were set out in the multilateral environmental agreements and upon agreed language. President, on the 1st and 2nd of February this year, the 22nd meeting of the Forum of Environmental Ministers of Latin America and the Caribbean took place, where our environmental authorities approved 8 concrete decisions to drive sustainable recovery. They also adopted a ministerial declaration, the Declaration of Bridgetown, and a call to action for the environmental dimension to sustainable recovery from COVID-19. In the Bridgetown Declaration, our ministers stressed that the pandemic magnified the inequalities that exist in our countries and between our countries and throughout the world. They also stressed the importance of multilateralism to further sustainable development and resolution of global problems. In turn, the need to strengthen solidarity and international cooperation to strengthen and assure the adequate provision of means of implementation to assist developing countries to tackle this crisis. Our ministers have highlighted the role of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals as critical roadmaps to achieve sustainable development in its economic, social, and environmental dimensions, stressing that eradication of poverty continues to be the central target of our endeavours. In turn, the principles of the Rio Declaration were stressed, including Principle 7 on common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, as well as the role of international cooperation to contribute to national endeavours. President, the Declaration underscores that social, economic and recovery strategies from the pandemic must be considered in sustainability at its very essence across its 3 dimensions, environmental, social and economic, guided by an inclusive and resilient development growth and centred upon the acceleration of environmental and climatic measures. Our region also acknowledges the need to continue working upon strengthening environmental governance and the enforcement of environmental legislation, including the mechanisms of access to information, environmental justice, and the participation in environmental public policies. President, the Bridgetown Declaration calls for transforming this crisis into an opportunity to integrate the environmental dimension sustainably and urgently, and to include an improved conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the planning of economic and social development in accordance with national priorities and national contexts. Against this backdrop, technology transfer, capacity building, and access to adequate funding will play a critical role. Faced with the economic fallout from this pandemic, it is critical to uphold the commitments and of financial support to developing countries. The declaration underscores the need to implement innovative financial mechanisms to foster and boost sustainable development, such as payment for environmental services. In turn, the declaration stresses that economic revival following the COVID-19 crisis should integrate the environmental dimension, so that the impact of the pandemic should not slow down the ability of governments to allocate resources to promote sustainable development and to guarantee the principle of environmental non-regressivity. President, lastly, the declaration stresses the importance that in the framework of economic recovery, that the social aspect is included, promoting economies which are low carbon and resilient, conservation and management and sustainable use of natural resources. In turn, The ministers acknowledge that to reduce future zoonotic diseases, both the current and underlying worries following the loss of biodiversity and degradation of ecosystems, then one must address in an integrated, efficient, selective and sustainable manner these risks. Likewise, one underscores that food and nutritional safety and security is essential in order to strengthen the ability and capacity of societies to meet and face up to zoonotic diseases. The declaration also stresses the relevance of regional cooperation, emphasizing the need to foster dialogue and information exchanges on best practices to manage natural resources. Lastly, President, our region would like to underscore once again the need to strengthen UNEP in Nairobi. For almost 2 years, the revision of the programme has been discussed, which unfortunately was not able to meet with approval for this session. Nevertheless, the membership did capitalise and agreed upon the best way to use the intersessional period, and for this reason we would hope to prepare in depth the substantive issues for the second session during this period. We feel that it is important that this work is continued in a face-to-face manner, taking into account the necessary precautionary measures, whilst at the same time that we do use virtual formats in order to ensure the participation of delegations who do not live in Nairobi can participate. Making the most of the intersessional period meets the imperious need to ensure a transparent, inclusive, and democratic participation of the membership. President, the full version of this statement will be sent in a written format to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. I now wish to call upon Her Excellency Mrs. Agrina Mussa, High Commissioner and Permanent Representative of Malawi, to deliver a statement on behalf of the Group of 77 in China. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to speak on behalf of the Group of 77 in China, Nairobi chapter. The group commends the UNEA and CPR Bureau, the Secretariat, and all other stakeholders for the hard work that has gone into organizing this online session of UNEA-5. The group also thanks the Republic of Kenya, the host country, for its continued support for the work of UNEP. Mr. President, the group would also like to congratulate all member states for the cooperation displayed during the 5th OECPR, which adjourned just a few days ago. The group also notes with great appreciation the excellent leadership of the Chair of Committee of Permanent Representatives, CPR, His Excellency Mr. Fernando Coimbra, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Brazil. With the support of the Bureau and of the Secretariat, and despite the logistical challenges posed by the pandemic, the Chair ensured the continuity of the important intersessional roles of the committee and ably chaired the 5th OECPR, paving the way for the central adoption of urgent administrative and budgetary decisions, including medium-term strategy for 2020 to 2025. Mr. President, the online session of UNEA-5 is taking place as the world attempts to overcome and recover from a pandemic that has been claiming lives, reversing much of the development gains and reversing the progress made in several areas during the past decades. As highlighted by the UN Secretary General in his 2020 SDG report, 71 million people were expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020, the first rise of global poverty since 1998. The G77 plus China Ministerial Declaration adopted last November recalls that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, remains the greatest global challenge and indispensable requirement for sustainable development. In this context, the G77 plus China recalls Principle 1 of the 1992 Rio Declaration, according to which human beings are at the center of the concerns of sustainable development and express the conviction that in order to achieve a just balance among the economic, social, and environmental needs of present and future generations, it is necessary to promote harmony with nature for the very possibility of overcoming poverty, eradicating hunger, and achieving all other SDGs depends on a healthy environment. Mr. President, the United Nations Environment Assembly is the highest decision-making body on the environment, which champions the environmental dimension of the SDGs. We welcome that its fifth session will provide opportunities to reflect on how to build back better and accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda as we start the decade of action. We appreciate that despite the incidence of the COVID-19 pandemic, UNEA has not lost sight of its enormous responsibility to come together for the well-being of people and the planet, even if it is in a self-restrained and virtual format. While acknowledging the outcomes of the virtual process during the OECPR, the G77 plus China looks forward to the day when in-person meetings can resume and the Assembly can meet in the UNEP headquarters in Nairobi, further strengthening the only UN headquarters in the Global South as called for by paragraph 88 of the Rio plus 20 outcome document, the future we want. Mr. President, the digital divide is real. The G77 plus China Ministerial Declaration recalls that many developing countries lack affordable access to information and communication technologies. We therefore appreciate that UNEP indicated the possibility of covering costs for access to high-speed internet for least developing countries to connect to this online session of UNEA-5. We remain nonetheless concerned with the challenges that online meetings imply in terms of participation, inclusivity, transparency, effectiveness, and multilingualism. It was precisely the recognition of the limitations of the virtual meetings that led us to consequentially agree to defer the consideration of substantive agenda items to the in-person session of UNEA-5, which we hope will be able to take place in February 2022, and to prepare for the online session solely a limited session of decisions on urgent administrative and budgetary matters as exception that demonstrates our commitment to the business continuity of UNEP. We look forward to being able to resume in-person consultations in Nairobi so as to prepare the ambitious outcomes that UNEA-5 will need to strengthen actions for nature to achieve the sustainable Development Goals. The G77 in China recognizes that resorting to digital means can facilitate the participation of those delegations without diplomatic representation in Nairobi. And we have been consistently appreciative of the efforts of the Secretariat in this regard, even before the current pandemic. Going forward, we are convinced that digital tools should be encouraged to complement in-person meetings, but not as a substitute to them. Mr. President, the group would like to reiterate the need for strengthened international cooperation and functioning multilateral institutions in dealing with key environmental challenges, which include biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution occasioned by waste and chemicals. In doing so, we must take into consideration the different national circumstances. The Ministerial Declaration of the G77 in China reiterates the need to uphold the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, in brackets CBDR, and to push North-South cooperation to continue to play its role so that all member states can fully implement their environmental commitments, and the international community will need to provide additional and strengthened means of implementation that involve financial support, access to technology transfer, and capacity building. Certainly, this is without prejudice to the need and obligation for member states to ensure national efforts to implement their environmental commitments, allowing for a just transition towards sustainable development. Therefore, we would like to urge ministers gathered here to reaffirm their collective commitment to build back better in the post-pandemic world and take actions needed for a coordinated and comprehensive multilateral response to environmental challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, in conclusion, G77 in China reiterates its commitment to strengthen actions for nature to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and hopes that the 3 draft decisions brought here for consideration will be adopted by consensus. We take note with appreciation the efforts of the UNEA President to prepare a draft consensual message for consideration at this online segment. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
And thank you. Next, we have the European Union and its member states. His Excellency, Mr. João Pedro Matos Fernandes, Minister of Environment and Climate Action of the Republic of Portugal. You have the floor.
Good morning to you all, Mr. President, Madam Executive Director, Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, and Ukraine aligned themselves with this statement. Allow me to start by congratulating the UNEA presidency and the executive director of UNEP and commending all member states for standing firm and committed to the organization of this online session, despite the challenging times we are living in. The environment is more important than ever. As we gathered at this digital UNEA, the highest level of global environmental governance, we wish to convey a strong message to the global community on the urgency for decisive action to address the pressing challenges we are all facing today. Faced with one of the greatest challenges in generation, humankind's strength and resilience has been put to a test by the pandemic. We all suffer from it, with devastating health and socioeconomic consequences, as well as with environmental threats. But COVID-19 has also offered us the opportunity to revisit the fundamental role of nature and the environment and the need to strive for sustainability. This is our mission today and will be our mission for tomorrow. The world is undergoing changes that affect us all and to which more must provide sustainable, responsible, and global responses. More than ever before, it is urgent to work together for an inclusive economic and societal recovery from this global humanitarian crisis, one that takes us closer to a truly green and fair transition. UNEP report, Making Peace with Nature, is very clear. First, our current development model degrades the Earth's finite capacity to sustain human well-being. Second, so far, we have been unable to meet most of our commitments to limit environmental damage. And third, we need a clear break with current trends of environmental decline if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Distinguished colleagues, this online session of UNEA must be an example of how, with the right amount of political will and determination from us all, we can move things forward. UNEA-5 theme is timely indeed, strengthening actions for nature to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This is not a slogan, it is a necessity. Nature cannot wait. Neither the rest of our pressing environmental and socio-economic challenges. Time is short and 2030 is around the corner. The EU and its member states welcome the decisions recommended for adoption by this Assembly. UNEP's groundbreaking medium-term strategy from 2022 to 2025 and the program of work and budget from 2022 to 2023 take a more holistic approach, and its design supports the Secretariat-General's UN reforms process for enhanced delivery by the UN and the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. It gives clear directions to tackle the environmental crisis with a focus on the need to address the main drivers, first and foremost, through much-needed transition to a more sustainable consumption and production development model. We stand ready to support this implementation. The EU and its member states further appreciate and support the efforts by the UNEA President to preserve a level of ambition that meets the urgent need to address specific goal challenges for the environment and human health, such as waste, chemicals, marine litter, and plastics. We shall continue our work, however, in the months to come. Crucial environmental summits are ahead of us, including the COPs for the 3 Rio Conventions. We have an enormous opportunity here to change things around for the better of our planet and accelerate the action on climate, biodiversity, land, chemicals and waste, and sustainable food systems. Moreover, we need a global agreement on plastic to tackle the ever-pressing problem of plastic pollution. It is our hope that we are able to join forces and launch these important negotiations at the resumed UNEA-5 session next year. The EU has embarked on a fundamental change of our economic model that addressed wasteful use of resources and puts nature at the center while strengthening our resilience. The European Green Deal and its rapid implementation with the recently adopted European strategies on circular economy, climate neutrality, biodiversity, food systems and chemicals, to mention a few, and the clear testimony of the EU determination and commitment. But we need everybody to join efforts in a global transition to a climate neutral, resource efficient, and circular economy, with a view to also continue to engage in enhanced international cooperation and strengthen global environmental governance. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank the UNEA President, our host country Kenya, and UNEP for launching the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of UNEP during this virtual session of UNEA-5. We look forward to collaborating in the intersessional period leading up to the resumed UNEA-5 to ensure a successful commemoration that honors the achievements of UNEP in the past 50 years. Mr. President, Madam Executive Director, this virtual session of the Environmental Assembly is only a beginning and a good start for what we must enact urgently in 2021 and the years to come in our action for nature. We are looking forward to the resumed in-person UNEA session in February next year to continue the hard work. The UNSG made it very clear in his address during the launch of UNEP reports, Making Peace with Nature, that 2021 is a make it or break it year. For nature, so with several upcoming important environmental COPs, followed by the resumed session of the UNEA in 2022, this is really a crucial year. Together, we must work to take action in the year to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, His Excellency Mr. Saleh bin Sulaiman Al-Harthi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Sultanate of Oman, speaking on behalf of the Arab Group. You now have the floor.
شكرا سيد رئيس جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة.
Thank you very much, President of UNEA.
السيدة جويس مسوية نائبة المديرة التنفيذية لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة، أصحاب المعالي الوزراء، أصحاب السعادة السفراء، الممثلين الدائمين، السيدات والسادة، أسعد الله أوقاتكم بكل خير. إنه لمن دواعي سروري أن أتوجه بكلمتي للجمعية الموقرة.
Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to address this
للبيئة بالإنابة عن المجموعة العربية. كما لا يفوتني أن أعبر عن شكري وتقديري الخالص لكافة الفاعلين الذين لم يدخروا جهدا لعقد هذه الدورة الافتراضية والعمل على إنجاحها. وخص بالذكر كل من مكتب جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة برئاستكم القديرة.
Distinguished representative,
any problem with the sound?
Please allow a second for the interpretation to come in. Just 1 minute. Can you start your statement now?
From the beginning?
From the beginning, a little slow, so that interpreters can pick it. Thank you.
Okay. From the beginning. سيد رئيس جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة.
President of UNEA.
المتحدة للبيئة، أصحاب المعالي الوزراء، أصحاب السعادة السفراء، الممثلين الدائمين، السيدات والسادة، أسعد الله أوقاتكم بكل خير. إنه لمن دواعي سروري أن أتوجه بالإنابة عن المجموعة العربية بكلمتي هذه للجمعية الموقرة وكافة المشاركين فيها بمناسبة انعقاد الجزء الأول من الدورة الخامسة لجمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة. كما لا يفوتني أن أعبر عن شكري الخالص لكافة الفاعلين الذين لم يدخروا جهدا لعقد هذه الدورة الافتراضية والعمل على إنجاحها. وخص بالذكر كل من مكتب جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة برئاستكم القديرة ولجنة المندوبين الدائمين التي يرأسها باستحقاق سعادة السفير فرناندو كويمبرا وكذا أمانة فرناندو
chairmanship of our president with the help of the CPR and its
تمرس. اسمحوا لي في البداية أن أشير إلى انعقاد الدورة في ظروف استثنائية أملتها الأزمة الصحية لجائحة كورونا، مما كان لها وقع كبير على سير الأعمال. لذلك كان على الجميع إيجاد طرق عملية وخلاقة لضمان سير عمل البرنامج. كما أود أن أؤكد على التزامنا واهتمامنا البالغين بالعمل متعدد الأطراف، خاصة في ظل هذه الظروف العصيبة التي تستدعي الدعم المتبادل بين البلدان، لا سيما فيما يتعلق بموضوع ذي أهمية فائقة مثل البيئة وتداعياته الآنية على الإنسانية وعلى الأجيال القادمة. السيدات والسادة، بالنظر إلى ما سبق ذكره، تقرر بالتوافق عقد الشق الأول من جمعية الأمم المتحدة للبيئة في صيغة افتراضية وتحديد عدد محدود من المواضيع التي يتم تداولها لتشمل المسائل الإجرائية البحتة التي لا تستدعي التفاوض، وعليه تم برمجة 3 قرارات ذات طابع إجرائي، خاصة القرار المتعلق بالاستراتيجية متوسطة المدى. في هذا السياق من الضروري ضم صوتنا للأصوات التي تنادي بوجوب العمل على تفعيل الاتفاقيات والمعاهدات البيئية، خاصة في شقها الخاص بوسائل التنفيذ، بما في ذلك التمويل والتمكين الفني من حيث نقل التكنولوجيا وتبادل الخبرات المتاحة وبناء القدرات. والحق أنه وكما
on financing, transfer of technology and of experience.
عدة اتفاقيات دولية محورية مثل مؤتمر ريو واتفاقية باريس، فإنه يجب التأكيد على محورية مبادئ المسؤولية المشتركة، ولكن متباينة الأعباء والإنصاف والمسؤولية التاريخية في العمل البيئي.
To implement the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, which
التأكيد على أن تكون تلك الجهود في إطار حق الدول في تحقيق التنمية المستدامة ومكافحة الفقر. السيدات والسادة، كما أود إعادة التأكيد على تلبية الاحتياجات الخاصة للبلدان النامية والبلدان المعرضة للكوارث والنزاعات أو المتضررة منها في إطار الاستراتيجية متوسطة الأجل لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة 2022
strategy for 2022-2025.
الظروف الاستثنائية وما تتيحه من إمكانية لضم أكبر عدد ممكن من المشاركين غير المتواجدين بنيروبي فرصة يجب تثمينها والعمل على تعزيزها مستقبلا بشكل تكميلي وليس كبديل للاجتماعات الفعلية، وذلك في ضوء النواقص التي لمسناها خلال التجربة العملية خلال أعمال اللجنة مفتوحة العضوية من حيث الانقطاعات المتكررة في الاتصال لشبكة الإنترنت، وكذا تعذر ضمان خدمة الترجمة بشكل مستمر. وتعد هذه النواقص والتحديات دليل آخر على الفجوة
a digital transformation in keeping with the medium-term strategy.
تعد ذلك إلى مواكبة العديد من البلدان للتطور السريع لتكنولوجيات الاتصالات والمعلومات بصفة عامة، وهو الأمر
A number of countries to accede to new ICT technologies.
الاستراتيجية متوسطة المدى للبرنامج. السيدات والسادة، إن المجموعة العربية تثمن الجهود المشتركة التي عملت ولا تزال تعمل على التحضيرات للاحتفال ب500 تأسيس برنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة بنيروبي، وإذ تدعم المساعي الرامية لبلوغ هذا الهدف، وتؤكد في هذا الصدد على الدور الرائد للمنظمة ومركزيتها في
UNEP. We wish to stress the important role the organization has played in environmental matters.
لإنجاز المهام المنوطة بها، فضلا عن تحقيق قدر أكبر من التمثيل الجغرافي العادل في وظائف السكرتارية وتقديم الدعم للدول الأعضاء في إطار التعاون على المستويين الإقليمي والثنائي، وهذا الأمر الذي يستوجب على الدول الأعضاء أخذه في الحسبان.
Helping them to partake in regional and global cooperation efforts. This is something that we need to take into account. Implementing United Nations institutional reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. As we move forward with this meeting, should you wish to make a statement in your national capacity, I invite you to raise your hand on the Interprefy meeting platform. The plenary session has limited time and there are various items still to be addressed. So, Each speaker will be limited to make an intervention within 2 minutes in accordance with Rules 38 and 39 of the Rules of Procedure. For this purpose, I invite you to consult the timer on your screen, which will show the time utilized by each intervention. I trust that with your support, we will finalize our proceedings within our time available. If you intend to make a short statement, I invite you to raise your hand now on the platform. First, I will invite the delegation of Switzerland, which has requested the floor to make a statement. Excellency, I strongly urge you to keep your statement under 2 minutes, and the floor is yours, Switzerland.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chairman. It's Switzerland's pleasure to make a statement in its national capacity. The message will be presented by Minister of the Environment, Transport, Energy, Communication, His Excellency, Madam the Federal Advisor, Simonetta.
Excellences, chers collègues.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, our duty is to protect our populations from the coronavirus. It is therefore a wise step to bring us together virtually. Protecting the environment and human health is a constant for us who are in charge of environmental policy. Therefore, we continue our multilateral work. Debate and decision-making must not stop, because environmental degradation does not stop, not even in a time of coronavirus. We continue our work because it's useful. Our multilateral action within the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, has led to important achievements in its almost 50 years of existence, such as, for example, the Montreal Protocol to protect the ozone layer, to give us just one example. Ambitious international targets and agreements are essential because they drive action at the national level. They put all of us under pressure and push us forward. And so, inspired by the Paris Agreement, the Swiss government a few weeks ago presented its long-term climate strategy, which will enable us to achieve a climate-neutral economy by 2050. Dear colleagues, let us be brave. Let us move forward further. We have successfully concluded agreements on climate change, biodiversity, chemicals, and waste. But all of this will not be enough to limit the climate crisis and the irreversible loss of biodiversity. In the months to come, we need to bolden our aspirations and to create governance tools that set targets and implementation control tools to, amongst others, combat biodiversity loss and to ensure the sound management of chemicals and hazardous waste. I believe it is now high time to launch negotiations for a convention on the plastics which choke our oceans. It is time also to create for chemical waste a scientific body similar to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And finally, it is time to draw up guidelines to ensure that the exploitation of raw materials and the construction of infrastructure stop harming nature and health. Next year, we will have two important meetings. It is up to us to take advantage of them to make further progress. First, there will be the 50th anniversary of the United Nations Environmental Programme in Nairobi. And then there will be Stockholm plus 50, which will recall the historic milestone of the 1972 Conference on the Human Environment, which declared that everyone has a solemn duty to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. We have taken and are still taking drastic measures to combat the coronavirus. Let's put the same energy into transforming our societies in the direction of sustainability. The goal, after all, is the same: to save lives.
Thank you very much. I remind you once again that if you do want to take the floor, please make a request so that we can close the speakers list. Meanwhile, I will now invite the delegation of Colombia to take the floor. Excellency, kindly remember to keep your statement under 2 minutes. Colombia, the floor is yours.
Distinguished Ambassador of Colombia, kindly, you seem to be connected. Kindly unmute yourself and deliver your statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope you're hearing me at this time. Good day to all of the distinguished ministers, ambassadors, and high commissioners, permanent representatives, representatives of the civil society, and of course to you, Mr. President, and all the UNEP team. Mr. President, Colombia wants to align itself with the statements made earlier by the distinguished ambassador of the Republic of Argentina and the High Commissioner of the Republic of Malawi on behalf of the GRULAC and G77 and China, respectively. Mr. President, at the outset, Colombia welcomes the positive outcomes of the virtual negotiations held during the OECPR. We will strongly support the full implementation of the medium-term strategy and the program of work and budget of the UNEP for the years ahead, and recognize the critical role that UNEP has to play as the global environmental authority in the challenging context of the pandemic. In this respect, Colombia wants to highlight the call for action adopted by the 22nd meeting of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean on the environmental dimension of COVID-19 and the importance of a sustainable recovery. Mr. President, despite the well-known challenges imposed by virtuality, Colombia welcomes the flexibility and resilience of the program and the member states to facilitate fruitful negotiations. Considering the pandemic evolution and the host country sanitary measures, we encourage UNEP to continue improving virtual negotiation platforms and remain committed to advancing the program work with virtual and hybrid formats before the resumed session of the Fifth Assembly in 2022. Finally, Mr. President, as the most diverse, biodiverse country per square meter, Colombia reaffirms its commitment with the adoption of an ambitious and effective post-2020 framework and the Convention on Biological Diversity. We have also announced Colombia's new mitigation target to reducing to 51% our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. At the regional level, we are working tirelessly for the protection of the Amazon region and the Leticia Pact, and are also promoting the transition toward more renewable energies in Latin America and the Caribbean with the RELAC initiative. This to mention some of the efforts we are displaying to address the current environmental crisis, a crisis that will only be possible to solve acting together and articulating our work at the multilateral, region and local levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now invite the delegation of Jordan to take the floor. Please, Jordan, you have the floor.
My speech in behalf of Jordan government and Minister of Environment in Jordan. Mr. President, معالي وزير البيئة والمناخ النرويجي السيد روتفاتن رئيس الدورة الخامسة لجمعية الأمم المتحدة، معالي السيدة إنجر أندرسون المدير التنفيذي لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Executive Director.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة.
Excellencies.
نجتمع اليوم افتراضيا وفي ظرف استثنائي سببته جائحة كوفيد-19.
So here we are, together in exceptional circumstances, those resulting from this pandemic.
المعيشية في العالم.
This has forced us to look
على الاقتصاد والمجتمع وعلى إدارة
the ways in which we consume, produce
وكذلك على كيفية
things and to determine the best ways to overcome these challenges. This is an opportunity for us to also look at future paths to addressing all this.
أثبت الوباء مرة أخرى أهمية الحرص على الاستدامة في العلاقة بين الإنسان والطبيعة، والتي يمكن أن تطلق الكثير من المخاطر الكامنة وغير المتوقعة
about the links between humans and nature. These are all multiple challenges.
إن المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية
And this also means
من بعد إنساني قد استضافوا على مدار العقود السابقة الملايين اللاجئين الذين فتحت أبوابها لهم وما زالت مستمرة
as it is of this noble mission has welcomed a great many refugees from the humanitarian crisis.
حيث تستضيف المملكة على أراضيها ما يقارب 3.5 مليون لاجئ.
In its neighborhood. On the Jordanian territory, we have close to 3 million refugees. 1,300,000 of them are refugees from Syria. 20% of the total population of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is now made up of refugees. According to the plan of action of the kingdom, 2020 to 2022, the kingdom requires over $6 billion to be able to, in an effective way, face up to the challenges, the negative challenges of this crisis, especially at the environmental level. Humanitarian assistance right now represents only $1.2 billion. That is 35% of the overall needs to meet the impact of this humanitarian crisis. The government has therefore devoted part of its state budget to overcome the difficulties resulting from this crisis.
السيدات والسادة، السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة،
Ladies and gentlemen,
إن الأردن وعلى الرغم من التحديات الكبيرة التي يواجهها يعتبر من الدول السباقة التي لها دور قيادي وراعد على المستويين الإقليمي والدولي في مجال التنمية المستدامة.
Pioneer when it came to shouldering responsibilities before others at a regional international level and committing itself to the path of the implementation of the SDGs so that we are able to achieve a green economy and to better promote sustainable development and to change current modes of production and consumption. This has been incorporated into our development plan for the implementation of the green economy, which was adopted in 2020 and which covers 4 years, from 2021 through to 2025. This concerns the management of waste, agriculture, transport, water resources, tourism and energy, as well as an optimization of the use of energy resources. This covered 86 measures with a total cost of $1.8 billion. We have in 2020 adopted a plan for the recycling of waste, for a reduction in the production of waste and a rationalization of the treatment of waste. This national plan was launched and it focuses on 35 priority areas. to optimize all of these policies which were adopted and which are all part and parcel of the Paris Climate Change Agreement.
ختاما finally أتقدم بالشكر لبرنامج
By way of
المتحدة
conclusion,
ولرئيس لجنة
I should
المندوبين
like to seize this opportunity to convey my gratitude to UNEP as well as to the CPR
والسكرتاريات
and its chair for the outstanding organization and outstanding preparation
التي نعيشها وعلى جهودهم الكبيرة في دعم
which preceded the convening of this meeting. This certainly had a positive impact which will enable us to achieve sustainable development. May God's peace be upon you. I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have now closed the speakers list. And next, I will invite the delegation of Nicaragua to take the floor. Please, Nicaragua, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente.
Good morning, President.
Queremos, en primer lugar, sumarnos a la declaración hecha por el Grupo 77 y China, el Grupo por Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Señor Presidente, según CEPAL, existen 4 crisis de la economía mundial. Primero, el COVID-19 está afectando el crecimiento del PIB y el comercio. Segundo, la desigualdad como barrera para el desarrollo. Tercero, los umbrales planetarios. Estamos llegando a un periodo de no retorno por la crisis ambiental y climática. Y cuarta, la doble simetría en temas ambientales y la importancia de defender el principio de responsabilidades comunes, preferenciadas y capacidades respectivas. Señor Presidente, Nicaragua es un país altamente sensible a los impactos del cambio climático. En noviembre de 2020 fuimos golpeados por 2 fenómenos naturales hidrometeorológicos de alta intensidad, huracanes ETA y IOTA, dejándonos daños por el orden de los $738 millones que representan el 6.2% del Producto Interno Bruto. A pesar de lo anterior, nuestro país cuenta con 72 áreas protegidas, 7% de la diversidad mundial, 68 ecosistemas, 20.000 especies de flora y fauna y 4.7 millones de hectáreas de bosque que representan el 35% del territorio nacional, donde al menos el 50% de estos se encuentran gestionados en territorios indígenas. El gobierno de Nicaragua hace grandes esfuerzos para generar un desarrollo humano y combatir la pobreza, y es por ello por lo que desarrollamos un modelo de gestión pública basada en la democracia directa, la economía creativa y solidaria y el buen vivir en armonía con la madre tierra, lo cual es consistente y contribuye a la Agenda 2030 y los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático, el Acuerdo de París y entre otros convenios y esfuerzos nacionales. Señor Presidente, la actual pandemia del COVID-19 es una señal de creciente irrespeto del ser humano a los ecosistemas del planeta. Las enfermedades zoonóticas emergentes muestran las consecuencias negativas de la presión humana sobre la naturaleza. Esto se acelera con la degradación de nuestros ecosistemas y la deforestación de los bosques. Pero también, señor Presidente, el COVID-19 es una oportunidad para cambiar los modelos de desarrollo, consumo y producción hacia sistemas solidarios, respetuosos y cooperativos que nos permitan considerar las asimetrías de nuestros pueblos y el respeto a nuestra madre tierra. La hermandad de los pueblos hacia objetivos comunes es el camino para el bienestar y la calidad de vida de las generaciones actuales y futuras. Señor Presidente, el gobierno de Nicaragua reafirma el compromiso para continuar trabajando hacia un modelo de desarrollo sostenible, de cuidado, amor y respeto hacia la madre tierra de la mano con nuestros protagonistas, grupos sociales, jóvenes, mujeres, familias, comunidades indígenas y rurales. Asimismo, instamos a la comunidad internacional a fortalecer la transición verde en países de desarrollo para una recuperación sostenible del COVID-19, incorporando la adaptación de los ecosistemas naturales con la mejor forma de crear resiliencia ante el cambio climático, la bioeconomía como fundamento para la sostenibilidad basada en ecosistemas naturales y la economía circular para preservar la utilidad y el valor de los materiales, reduciendo los niveles de contaminación. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. As I said, the speakers list is now closed, and on my list I have Algeria, I have Tanzania, and I have Bangladesh. So first, I'll give the floor to Algeria and to Her Excellency, the Minister, Dalila Bujema, who I understand also is recently appointed. So congratulations on your appointment. Please, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi d'abord d'exprimer l'immense plaisir que j'ai à participer avec vous tous en ligne à cette 5e session de l'Assemblée des Nations Unies pour l'environnement. Je saisis l'occasion pour féliciter Son Excellence M. Sveinung, ministre norvégien de l'Environnement et du Climat, pour son élection à la présidence de cette honorable Assemblée. Je voudrais souhaiter également à Madame la directrice exécutive plein de succès dans sa mission et je voudrais aussi vous assurer pleinement la disponibilité, notre disponibilité à œuvrer pour ensemble pour faire avancer la cause environnementale. Alors, l'Algérie, c'est résolument... Vous m'entendez?
Oui, Madame la Ministre. Continuez.
Alors, l'Algérie s'est résolument engagée dans la voie du développement durable dans sa nouvelle constitution adoptée en novembre 2020 qui garantit un environnement sain à sa population et la préservation des ressources naturelles et des écosystèmes. L'intégration de ces principes même au sein du corpus de la loi fondamentale du pays constitue un engagement solennel à la mise en œuvre de politiques publiques efficaces garantissant un développement économique et social respectueux de l'environnement et de la nature. L'Algérie a intégré les objectifs de développement durable en tant que cadre de référence pour son développement national. Elle a pu atteindre avant terme certains de ces objectifs, notamment l'éradication de la pauvreté, l'accès à l'eau, l'éducation, la réduction de la mortalité infantile et maternelle et œuvre intensivement à la promotion d'un environnement durable. La restauration des écosystèmes est parmi nos priorités en Algérie. Nous nous sommes engagés dans le cadre de la proclamation de la décennie des Nations Unies pour la restauration des écosystèmes 2021-2030 à atténuer les facteurs directs de la dégradation des terres et des écosystèmes et à intégrer leur restauration dans les politiques, plans et programmes sectoriels. Outre sa constitution, l'engagement de l'Algérie pour le développement durable se traduit dans la loi 0310 de 2003 relative à la protection de l'environnement dans le cadre du développement durable, ainsi que dans la stratégie nationale pour l'environnement et le développement durable qui couvre presque l'intégralité des objectifs du développement durable. Cette stratégie se décline en 7 axes qui portent sur l'amélioration de la santé et de la qualité de vie, la préservation du capital naturel et culturel, le développement de l'économie verte et circulaire, l'augmentation de la résilience face à la désertification, l'amélioration de la résilience au changement climatique, la sécurité alimentaire et la gouvernance environnementale. L'exécution de cette stratégie et l'engagement que nous prenons en Algérie pour transformer et rationaliser progressivement nos modes de production et de consommation afin de préserver nos ressources naturelles, particulièrement dans ce contexte difficile post-Covid. Monsieur le Président, l'Algérie accueille avec satisfaction la proclamation de la décennie des Nations Unies pour la restauration des écosystèmes 2021-2030 par notre engagement à restaurer et consolider le barrage vert, une ceinture verte qui vise à stopper l'avancée du désert vers le nord, reliant les frontières algériennes d'est en ouest sur une longueur de 1500 km, à réhabiliter et à développer les espaces forestiers productifs et à conserver et à utiliser durablement la biodiversité et les écosystèmes terrestres et forestiers. Voilà. Donc, à cet égard, mon pays reste convaincu que l'éradication de ce genre de pandémie et l'atténuation de ses impacts est un défi majeur qui nécessite la mise en place d'un modèle de développement et de croissance économique, sociale, inclusif et équitable, protecteur des ressources naturelles et de l'environnement et soucieux de satisfaire les besoins des générations actuelles et futures, à travers la promotion des modèles de consommation et de production durable et d'une forte solidarité sur le plan sanitaire. Cette 5e session de l'Assemblée des Nations Unies pour l'environnement doit être l'occasion pour prendre des mesures ambitieuses pour reconstruire vert, en veillant à ce que la relance économique post-Covid-19 ne se fasse pas aux dépens de l'environnement et du développement durable. Il est de notre responsabilité collective de prendre des mesures décisives, équitables et courageuses pour un avenir durable que nous voulons tous pour les générations futures. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you very much. I will now invite the delegation of Tanzania to take the floor. Please, Tanzania, you have the floor.
His Excellency Rotevatn, President of UNEA and the Minister of Environment and Climate of Norway, Excellence Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the UNEP, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Almighty God for blessing us with good health that has enabled us to meet here today despite of the global pandemic. I feel honored for this privilege today to address this 5th UN Environmental Assembly, UNEA-5, on behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania. We are indeed pleased to be part of this February 2021 Assembly through virtual convergence in the wake of the COVID-19. At this juncture, I wish to inform this Assembly that my delegation aligns itself with the African group as well as the G77 and the China statements. Mr. President, Tanzania shares the recognition that COVID-19 pandemic has put more pressure in the world, socio-economic development and the efforts to achieve sustainable development and eradicate poverty as the world depends on its environments and the natural resources. Undoubtedly, this pandemic has put at stake our efforts to attain our desired conservation and the sustainable development goals. Tanzania is optimistic that we shall overcome this greater peril of our time. To this end, we recognize and appreciate all the individuals and the collective efforts undertaken by each member state to ensure that this pandemic is effectively addressed and the livelihood of our people and the economies are revived. In this context, we highly commend the ongoing initiative by UNEP and you, Mr. President, in particular, considering post-COVID-19 recovery measures as one of the agenda item for this meeting, which will also contribute to the meeting of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. Mr. President, as you may recall that the theme of UNEA-5, strengthening actions for nature to achieve the sustainable development goals, we as a global community are called to strengthen our actions to protect and restore nature and use nature-based solutions to achieve the sustainable development goals in its social, economical, and environmental dimension by 2030. Tanzania recognizes the importance of biodiversity and the benefits it renders to the human well-being at a national and a global level. We take note of the ongoing progress by CBD on the preparation of post-2020 global diversity framework. It has continued taking ambitious steps to conserve and protect the environment, including development and the implementation of relevant national policies, legislations, strategies and plans, engagement of non-state actors in biodiversity conservation and the management, conservation and the designation of a new protected area. The government will soon embark on reviewing its biodiversity strategy and action plan in line with the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and for the international community to provide support in implementation of the strategy. Mr. President, regarding the effort to reduce impact of climate change, the country has taken some steps envisioned to address challenges associated with climate change as outlined in our national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. We also implement projects which are aimed at building resilience to climate change impacts in various areas. Furthermore, the government established the National Carbon Monitoring Center at the Sokoine University of Agriculture in Morogoro region. The center, among others, is aimed at developing, maintaining, analyzing, and updating carbon database to facilitate taking stock of countries' contribution in carbon sequestration. Furthermore, the country is implementing the construction of the standard gauge railway system and the establishment of the large hydroelectricity generation with the capacity of 2,000 megawatt at Mwalimu Nyerere hydro project, which contribute to enhancing efficiency and effectiveness in transportation and energy sectors. This initiative aims at reducing the greenhouse gases emission as well as enhancing the national capacity to adapt to the impact of climate changes and enhance the resilience of the country. Mr. President, before concluding my statement, I wish to recall to the delegates to the meeting of the African Ministerial of Environment held on 8th special session of AMCEN virtually on 4th December 2020 with the theme Enhancing Environmental Action for Effective Post-COVID-19 Recovery in Africa, in which the ministers reaffirmed commitment to continue effort to conserve, protect, and enhance the resilience of African environment and the natural resources as part of their determined effort in the fight against the COVID pandemic. Tanzania supported the decision made by AMCEN toward the implementation of the program as an integral part of African social economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and enhance resilience in the face of future crises. While remaining cognizant of challenges and the commitment made before this pandemic, we therefore request financial, technological, and the personnel capacity to support from bilateral and multilateral partners for successful implementation of the program. Finally, Mr. President, I wish to emphasize that Tanzania is fully committed to global efforts toward strengthening action for nature to achieve the sustainable development goals. However, tackling environmental challenges with the current global pandemic impedes our efforts. Therefore, there is a need to increase support, including facilitating access to finance, technology, and innovation solutions to help developing countries build more resilient and inclusive economies in a post-COVID-19 era. I look forward to the fruitful deliberations and the outcomes of this special session. I thank you all for your kind attention. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now finally invite the delegation of Bangladesh to take the floor. And a kind reminder to keep your statement under 2 minutes. Please, Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. Distinguished delegates, Bangladesh is already dealing with multiple interlinked crises: climate change, environmental degradation, and rising inequalities. COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed and deepened its vulnerability and threatened to undermine the country's progress towards climate resilient, sustainable development. Unless recovery measures are fair, inclusive, and ambitious, decades of development gains could be wiped out. Under the emerging leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh has already started fair, inclusive, and ambitious recovery measures placing climate, nature, and development and its heart. The country is moving on a development pathway to become a middle-income country by 2021 and has a dream to go beyond. In doing so, we have included environmental pollution control and climate change issues in our development strategy. Mr. President, Bangladesh has made commendable effort to streamline regulatory to institutional setting in realizing the aspiration of environmental friendly development by creating required policies and regulatory frameworks. We have included environmental consideration in our constitution, which states the state shall endeavor to protect, improve the environmental and preserve and safeguard the natural resources, biodiversity, wetlands, forests, and wildlife for the present and future citizens. Besides a number of environmental rules and regulations, the country has recently enacted Biodiversity Act of Ecologically Critical Area Management Rules. Moreover, the 8th five-year plan 2021-2025 of the government has included a green growth strategy to harmonize economic growth with better environmental sustainability. Distinguished delegates, the government must work together if we want to make the recovery faster, cheaper, and easier for all. To facilitate our combined effort, cooperation among countries, be it development or developing, is pivotal. Nevertheless, countries, those who are in a position to contribute and provide support more should take the lead. Lastly, I sincerely appreciate your leadership to bring us together in this event. I hope this assembly will guide us towards a more resilient environment, a greener economy, recovery, and safer climate for all. Thank you all.
Thank you all for your statements. That was the last speaker on my list of speakers. And we have thus concluded the opening remarks. That means that we now have 50 minutes to finish the rest of our agenda for today. So hopefully, if we keep it brief and keep interventions short, we will succeed in finishing our agenda. Now, I will invite the meeting to turn its attention to agenda item number 3, credentials of representatives. The Bureau of the Assembly, in its capacity as the Credentials Committee, has examined the credentials of representatives and has made a report. Allow me now to invite His Excellency Mr. Ado Lomos, who's Vice President of the UNEA and Permanent Representative of Estonia, to read the report on behalf of the Credentials Committee. Vice President Lomos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is my pleasure to report on behalf of the Bureau on the status of credentials to the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. The Bureau has examined the credentials of member states submitted in accordance with Rules 16 and 17 of the Rules of Procedure of the United Nations Environment Assembly. As of 22nd of February 2021, copies of formal credentials signed by the head of state or government or the Minister for Foreign Affairs or official notifications such as in the form of letters or note verbal, including from permanent mission, have been received electronically from 151 member states concerning their participation in the Environment Assembly. 42 member states have not communicated to the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme as of 22nd of February 2021 any information regarding their representatives to the Assembly. The Bureau recommends that the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Programme accept the official communications from member states concerning their participation in the 5th session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report, Mr. Lomos. Now, does the Assembly wish to take note of the report? I see no objections. It is so decided. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 4, the report of the Committee of Permanent Representatives. For this agenda item, I have the honor to invite my colleague, His Excellency Mr. Fernando Coimbra, who is chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, ambassador, and permanent representative of Brazil to the UN Environment Programme, to present the report of the committee, focusing on the key outcomes of the 5th meeting of the Open-Ended Committee, which concluded on Wednesday, February 17th, 2021. Please, Mr. Coimbra, you have the floor.
President, I do not know if my video, yes, it is. Very well. Mr. President of the United Nations Environment Assembly, honorable ministers, Madam Executive Director, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. I have the distinct honor to provide you with a report on the work of the Committee of Permanent Representatives since the 4th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, as well as on the outcomes of the 5th meeting of the Open-Ended Committee of Permanent Representatives, held virtually from 15 to 17 February 2021. The content of this oral report is reflected in writing in the document UNEP/EA4/INF/2, entitled, and I quote, Report on the Work of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, end of quote, and in document OACPR/5/3, entitled, and I quote, Draft Chair's Summary of the 5th Meeting of the Open-Ended Committee of Permanent Representatives, end of quote. They have been made available on the OACPR-5 and UNEA-5 meeting websites, respectively. Mr. President, Excellencies, since UNEA-4, the committee has convened 8 regular meetings covering a very wide range of topics, such as the follow-up of the many outcomes of UNEA-4, the process mandated by General Assembly Resolution 73/333, the preparations towards an action plan to implement paragraph 88 of the Future We Want, the preparations for the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations Environment Programme, and presentations of UNEP flagship reports. We have also convened twice in the format of the annual subcommittee of the Committee of Permanent Representatives in October 2019 and October 2020 to perform review and oversight of the implementation of the current program of work and undertake consultations on the preparation of a new medium-term strategy for 2022-2025 and a program of work and budget for 2022-2023. We have also discussed the review of our internal structures and working methods under the known as process for review by the CPR, among other issues. Moreover, the committee has, on average, met once or twice a month under the format of a subcommittee to advance the consideration of all these important matters. Finally, it is my pleasure to announce that we successfully concluded the online segment of the 5th meeting of the open-ended meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives last week. In doing so, we took note of the official reports of the Executive Director to UNEA-5, and following the constructive engagement of all delegations, despite the many challenges associated with holding virtual meetings and technical difficulties faced, agreed to recommend the following three draft decisions for adoption by this Assembly. First, UNEP/EA5/L2, Management of Trust Funds and Earmarked Contributions. UNEP/EA5/L3, Medium-Term Strategy for 2022-2025 and Program of Work and Budget for the biennium 2022-2023, and UNEP/EA5/L4, Adjournment and Resumption of the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. In addition, the committee heard a briefing from yourself, Mr. President, regarding the consultations on your proposal for a possible consensual message from the online session of UNEA-5. The committee took note with appreciation of your intention to put forward the proposed message for final consideration and possible endorsement by this Assembly, with the understanding that it does not constitute a negotiated outcome of UNEA-5 and shall not set a precedent for future meetings. Further information about the 5th meeting of the open-ended meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives is available in the draft chair summary, document OACPR/5/3. Mr. President, Excellencies, when the United Nations Environment Assembly is not in session, it is for the Committee of Permanent Representatives to perform indispensable roles for the functioning of our program. During the intercessional period, it is the intergovernmental body providing the UNEP Secretariat with regular and clear guidance, following up on the implementation of resolutions and decisions taken by previous sessions of the Assembly, and preparing all negotiated outcomes for the incoming session of the Assembly. The impressive number of meetings held by the committee over the past 2 years provide a solid testimony to the role of Nairobi as the world's environmental capital and of the progressive strengthening of the only UN headquarters in the Global South. Since spring last year, as the world started to grasp with the tragic consequences of COVID-19 pandemic, and all of us have been forced to adapt our working methods, all of the committee's meetings have been held online and were not postponed or delayed one single meeting. I believe that this is another testimony of the commitment of the diplomatic community in Nairobi to the business continuity of UNEP itself, fully aware of the need to foster sustainability as we build back better. However, holding online meetings has not been without its challenges, which range from those stemming from the digital divide to those associated with ensuring multilingualism. The committee has nonetheless continued to consider matters of key importance, take crucial decisions, and deliver effective guidance and advice to the Secretariat. Aware of the limitations inherent to virtual meetings, which hamper equal participation and inclusivity, and of the need to ensure the good functioning of UNEP, the bureaus of UNEA and of the CPR consensually decided that the current online session of UNEA-5 should focus solely on urgent and administrative decisions, and further decided to postpone the preparation of substantive negotiated outcomes until in-person meetings can resume, which I sincerely hope can happen in the coming months. The role of the CPR will become all the more necessary and relevant in this exceptional period between the virtual part of this session of UNEA and its reconvened session, which is expected to be held in person in Nairobi in February 2022. Let me end by recognizing your leadership, Mr. President, and thanking you for that. We wish you once more a successful presidency of UNEA. Rest assured that the CPR will spare no efforts and work tirelessly for the substantive and ambitious results we all aspire to. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank my fellow members of the CPR Bureau, as well as the dedication of the co-facilitators for the CPR-based review and for the process of informal consultations under the auspices of the CPR for General Assembly Resolution 73/333. Let me also express gratitude to the colleagues from the Secretariat who have so ably supported us throughout these challenging past 2 years, both for our face-to-face meetings and for the many online meetings. Adapting to virtual working methods has been and continues to be a learning curve for all. I sincerely thank you for sparing no efforts that the CPR be allowed to continue performing its critical roles by furnishing us with real as well as virtual meeting rooms, background documents, interpretation, expertise, logistic support, legal advice, and screen editing. Before I conclude, Mr. President, I also wish to express my sincere gratitude to the former chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives, and until a few weeks ago, its rapporteur, Her Excellency Madam Francisca Ashiete Odunton, former High Commissioner and Permanent Representative of Ghana, who led the committee until June 2019. I thank her for the transparency, camaraderie, and diligent leadership. With that said, Mr. President, I hereby formally submit the Chair's summary of the 5th Open-Ended Committee of Permanent Representatives to the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly for its consideration. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your succinct report. I would also like to take this opportunity to invite the Assembly to celebrate the achievements made by the committee under the able leadership of Ambassador Coimbra and his predecessor, High Commissioner Ashiete Odunton, and their Bureau members. Now, does the Assembly wish to take note of the report? I see no objections. It is so decided. That concludes consideration of the report of the Committee of Permanent Representatives. Moving on to agenda item number 12, adoption of the resolutions, decisions, and outcome document of the session. I will now invite the Assembly to consider and adopt proposed decisions brought forth to the Assembly from the 5th meeting of the Open-Ended Committee of Permanent Representatives as part of agenda item 12, adoption of the resolutions, decisions, and outcome document of the session. Delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with these decisions will be invited to do so after the adoption by the Assembly. The first proposed decision is UNEP-EA-5-L2, Management of Trust Funds and Earmarked Contributions. Does the Assembly wish to adopt decision UNEP-EA-5-L2? I see no objections. It is so decided. I now announce the decision on the management of trust funds and earmarked contributions adopted. The next draft decision is UNEP-EA5-L3 medium-term strategy for 2022 to 2025 and program of work and budget for the biennium 2022-2023. Does the Assembly wish to adopt decision UNEP-EA5-L3? I see no objections. It is so decided. I now announce the decision on medium-term strategy for 2022 to 2025 and program of work and budget for the biennium 2022 to 2023 is adopted. The last decision is UNEP-EA5-L4 adjournment and resumption of the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Does the Assembly wish to adopt decision UNEP-EA5-L4? I see no objections. It is so decided. The decision on adjournment and resumption of the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly is adopted. Does any delegation wish to make a statement in connection with any of the 3 decisions that the Assembly has adopted?
No, President, there are no requests for the floor.
No requests for the floor. Well then, Excellencies, before adjourning this meeting, I wish to remind you that there are 2 opportunities to engage in leadership dialogues. The first one, just 2 seconds. Before I continue with adjourning the meeting and some information, I will ask Ms. Inger Andersen if she wishes to make a statement at this moment. Please, Inger, you have the floor.
Distinguished Executive Director, perhaps you're muted. No additional remarks from the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Now, Excellencies, as I said before adjourning this meeting, I wish to remind you that there are 2 opportunities to to engage in leadership dialogues. The first one being this afternoon from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Nairobi time. The second one being tomorrow morning from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. again Nairobi time. The leadership dialogues are an opportunity for high-level discussions on the contribution of the environmental dimension of sustainable development to building a resilient and inclusive post-pandemic world. I encourage you to participate and listen in on these dialogues as we share experiences. Now, let me ask at this point the Secretariat if you have any housekeeping items or anything else that needs to be announced, then you have the opportunity to do so now.
Thank you, distinguished President, and to thank you for your able leadership. The only request that I have is for delegations that will participate in the first leadership dialogue to connect promptly to the link that has been made available to the participants of the dialogue, and ensure that your interventions in the dialogue are very short, under absolutely 3 minutes, because we have a very high amount of interest from ministers and high-level representatives to participate in our dialogue. So in order to be able to be as efficient as we have been today, we will trust on the leadership of representatives to ensure that their remarks are under 3 minutes in any case during the dialogue. For the rest of the participants and delegations, stakeholders, and citizens interested in the work of this assembly, we have provided links, open links, from which you can follow the leadership dialogues and engage with the high-level representatives discussing these important topics. So that would be the only housekeeping announcement that I have. The plenary will reconvene tomorrow at 11 a.m. Nairobi time, promptly for its wrap-up session. So I hand the floor back to you, distinguished. At 2 o'clock, yes, we will have a leadership dialogue at 11, and then the plenary will reconvene at 4 o'clock. The floor back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank all participants for your cooperation today, which has made that we have now successfully made the decisions that were on our agenda, and we are able to also finish the meeting ahead of time. So that is excellent. Thank you very much for your cooperation. With that said, I now declare this meeting adjourned until the afternoon of Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021 at 4 p.m. Nairobi time. Thank you all.